I don't want to give it away.
You're about to give it away.
Wait, what passage?
I'm doing chapters 2 through 6. What?
All right.
Yes, you'll need one of those.
Okay, Johnny, I think you just mentioned this, but who is your listening group today?
Normal church context.
Like, is this
Like
like,
non-denominational 200
are
people.
we talking like New Life?
You can't fire the help.
New
you
Life
didn't
Lincoln
hire the
Park?
help. Yes.
That-
Yeah.
Perfect. I've been there.
That is a normal church code?
That is normal non-denominational 200 people church context.
All right.
Kind of
Anything else we need to know that you want us to know? Okay, great.
Preaching from Joshua.
So, okay. Well, we look forward to hearing from you. So yeah, whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Josh, begin. Okay.
I am alive today because of my sister. And those are words I would have never expected to say. I am here living and breathing in front of you because of the faith of my sister, which still to this day makes zero sense to me. I'm sure you all have questions. What is an Amorite like myself doing on the edges of the Israelites' camp? What am I, a former resident of Jericho, doing in a place like this among the enemy? It's a question I've asked myself frequently in the last couple of days. And as I've reflected, the one conclusion that I can draw for myself at least is that God, the one true God of Israel, can use anyone's faith. God can use anyone's faith. Even the faith of my sister, Rahab, the prostitute. I just still get chills saying that out loud to myself. Where to even begin with Rahab? She was always so headstrong. She was always so stubborn and argumentative in our family. She was one of those people that it was just hard to get along with. She had to go her own way. I'm sure you have people like that in your life. You can think about them. Maybe they sit at the dinner table with you at a family reunion. Maybe you live around them right now. The kinds of people that it's just painful to watch them try to go through life. It's hard. That's how Rahab was growing up. See, in my society, the family structure rules everything, and the father rules the family. So you can imagine our pain and confusion when Rahab came to us one day years ago and said that she wanted to leave our household. She didn't have a man in her life. She didn't have a husband or a boyfriend or even any potential suitors. So we were confused. What was she going to do? Where was she going to go? But she insisted. She was always so stubborn, Rahab. And so after arguing with my parents and fighting with my father, we finally just surrendered. She left the household and moved down to a little hole in the wall. Literally, a home on the very wall of Jericho's border. We didn't know how she was living until one day my father went to check on her, and you can imagine our heartbreak as a family when we realized that she had turned to prostitution. My sister Rahab turned to prostitution in order to make ends meet. I'm sure it was never her first choice. It wouldn't be anyone's first choice, but she was so stubborn, so set in her ways, that my sister Rahab became a prostitute. Of course, at that point, it was definitely too painful for our family to continue associating with her. We had to just turn her away, let her go on her own. I'm all for extended grace, I really am. I want to forgive, but there comes a point where you just can't walk with somebody on a journey so faithless. It's heartbreaking, but love only goes so far. And yet, in recent days, everything has changed for my family. And I now believe with absolute certainty that God can use anyone's faith, anyone at all. I remember the day that Rahab re-entered our lives. I awoke before dawn to the sounds of our war trumpets blaring from the watchtowers of Jericho's wall. I heard startled and confused voices from outside my door in the city town square. And I checked on my wife and my children, and then I went out to investigate. And as dawn crept over the eastern horizon, I looked over Jericho's walls, and what I saw made my heart drop into my stomach. There on the edge of the horizon, plain as day, was an enemy camp. You could see their fires spread out below Jericho. Who were these people coming towards us? Everyone in Jericho was nervous. The energy was palpable. And I remember thinking to myself, are these Phoenicians? We'd heard of them. They lived on the coast. Are these our neighbors to the south? But they were coming from the east, and we'd only ever heard legends of people from the east. People who walked in the wilderness. Israelites, that's what they were called. We heard whispers of them, rumors from travelers, that they had left Egypt as an army of slaves, and they followed a great and terrible, an awful God who brought darkness and disease, pestilence to Egypt, and death. This was a God that moved with his people. This was a God that fed this wandering army food from the sky and quenched their thirst with water from rocks. It was terrifying. Nobody in Jericho wanted to believe that such a God or such a people existed. That truth would be too terrible to believe. It was the types of stories you tell your children at night to get them to behave. And yet here was an enemy camp. Were these the Israelites people whispered about here in Jericho? Were these those people? I remember seeing them off in the distance and then hearing my name called. I turned around and saw for the very first time in years Rahab running towards me, barefoot and out of breath. I remember being so confused to see her. She was reclusive. She stayed in her home, her place of work. What was she doing here? Why was she coming to me today of all days? She was insistent that I gather my children and my wife and come with her to her home. Rahab's home. I'd never been there before. But wasn't it just like Rahab? She insisted. She argued and yelled until she finally got her way. I remember being confused and afraid. And so I gathered my family and I went with her down to the walls of Jerusalem, or walls of Jericho. And there, as I ducked under a red cord and stepped across the threshold into her dimly lit home, I saw my whole family crowding into her tiny abode. My parents, my mother and father, all my siblings and their families. I remember being so confused. What was going on? We gathered around Rahab, and she told us the story of her life. She reintroduced herself to us for the very first time in years. Rahab, in her prostitution, became intimately acquainted with the gods of our culture. See, as an Amorite, I worshipped the gods of the Canaanites, gods of youth and fertility, war and lust. This was what our culture did. And in her profession, Rahab became well acquainted with these gods of our culture. She said that in her work, she hit rock bottom, and she found that our gods had no answers for her there. And with nothing left, she began to hope for something more. She told us that one night, one dark night, two men came to her who were unlike any other men who'd ever come to her. They claimed to be spies for the God of Israel, the God that we whisper about in the dark of night. They said that they were looking for refuge from the king. He had sent men to find them. Rahab did something that to me seemed counterintuitive and bizarre. She took them in on faith. Rahab had faith. Her profession was so worldly. Her lifestyle was so stubborn and resolute. I found it hard to believe, but she took them in and she hid them from our king. Action that would have definitely signed her death warrant had she been found. But she diverted the king's attention and allowed the Israelite spies, she allowed them to escape. I guess Rahab always has been friends with the wayward, with the traveler, with those who are from out of town. It comes with her profession. And she'd heard whispers, intimate details of people's lives. She knew that the kings of Bashan and Heshbon, Og and Sihon, our fellow Amorites, had fallen to this Israelite force. So she decided to have faith in them. This didn't make much sense to me because, to me, I had faith in my walls. Every spring I would go out with the men and we would build up the walls of Jericho. I would worship in the temple. I offered sacrifices. I did the rituals. That's what I would have faith in. And yet Rahab gestured to a red cord that hung outside of her window and said this would be the signal to the Israelites. This cord would be her faith. It flew in the face of everything that I had ever known. I trusted in walls. I trusted in my works. And now the most wayward member of my family was coming to me and saying that she alone had the faith to deliver us. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? What would you have done? Rahab had faith. It didn't make sense. And as the days passed, the Israelite army came up to Jericho, and what they did didn't make much sense either to me. See, we'd withstood sieges before here in Jericho. Jericho is an ancient city. We don't know how it originated, but our town is a town built on top of the ruins of a town, built on top of the ruins of a town. And with each successive layer, we rose higher over the surrounding landscape. Anybody who attacked Jericho would be fighting an uphill battle. Not only that, but we had a spring within our town's walls. So while a surrounding army would have to stand in the hot sun with little resources, we could eat and drink our fill and wait them out. Not only that, but if anybody attacked Jericho, they would be facing a 17-foot high mud brick wall that surrounded our city and a 9-foot trench that lay below it. We were a secure place, and we were ready for siege. But the army of Israel did something bizarre. Rather than attacking us, each day they would march out at dawn, blow their war horns, and march once around the city. They didn't try to negotiate. They didn't call out to us. They didn't even attack. They simply marched around the city. And as they did this day in and day out, we became accustomed to their pattern. Our fear turned to confusion and then amusement within the walls of Jericho. I was so confused by the Israelites. I was so confused by Rahab. Didn't they know that in order to win, in order to get the victory, there had to be a little blood spilled? Their faith was going to save them. We had walls, and they marched around them. It made no sense to me. And all of the people of Jericho were amused. We would line the ramparts and jeer at the Israelites as they marched around day in and day out. But then the seventh day, the day that I still have nightmares about, came. They'd been marching for 6 days in a regular pattern that we'd come to expect. People lined the walls to watch these ridiculous Israelites march. And as they did, something changed. Rather than going once around our walls and then stopping, they began marching again and again. And the civilians on top of the wall were replaced by soldiers because we knew that something was happening. We just didn't know what. They marched, and as they marched around the seventh time, an eerie silence fell over everyone. And then the sounds of their war horns came blaring out. These war horns still haunt me while I try to fall asleep at night sometimes. And all the Israelites cried out in a loud voice all at once, and at the exact same moment, our walls began to tremble. The ground beneath Jericho began to shake. I remember that terrifying day well. Our walls crumbled and fell from around us. I remember the very side of Rahab's house being cleaved off and falling into the trench below. And I realized with horror that the walls that we had trusted suddenly became a bridge, a way for the Israelites to enter into our city. I remember the smoke in my lungs and the heat from the fires that burned outside Rahab's door. I remember hearing the cries and screams of Jericho's citizens. The Israelites and their attack came swift and ruthless. Belongings were strewn through the streets. Blood ran in the gutters. It was a terrible day to be a citizen of Jericho. But I also remember seeing Rahab's window, hanging by a splintered piece of wood, if by a miracle, that red cord still hung. I remember hearing the Israelites enter into the collapsed house of Rahab. They offered my wife and children food and water to drink and said that no harm would come to us because we were in Rahab's house. Rahab's faith delivered us. Rahab's faith delivered her whole family. It still doesn't make sense to me that this God of Israel can use the faith of anyone. It's so counterintuitive to the way that I've lived, yet I know it to be true. He can use even the faith of my sister Rahab. I have to go now. I'm learning the Israelites' holy book from my next door neighbor. His name's Achan. He's a good man. He's the head of his household. He's a wealthy man. And he's going to teach me the ways of the Israelites. So I have to go now. You'll have to excuse me. Bye.
All right. Good job, Johnny. Give us just a moment. Johnny, how you feeling?
Good.
Yeah? Did you
Yeah.
say everything you wanted to say in the manner in which you wanted to say it?
Yeah. I think it went wellish.
Okay. Welsh?
Wellish.
Welsh.
Yeah.
Yes, from people from Welsh. People who are Welsh. Okay, great. So, what did you get for Johnny's big idea? God can. Yeah. Good. Good. This side of the room. What did you get for his big idea?
That's it.
What'd you say? What would you say?
God can use anyone's faith.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. And that was great. Okay. All right. So let me ask class. What did he do well? What were some of the strengths? What did you like about this? Yeah.
I thought that
Mark
it
and
was
Mark.
extremely clear.
Good.
I thought that the entire time that you, were speaking, I didn't even notice the transitions. The one transition that you made from being kind of talking about the context, the introduction, I thought you raised the modern tension really, really well. The introduction I thought was like, in my opinion, the introduction was like one of the best aspects of this. It was just like clear.
Good. Great. Yeah. Other Mark.
I echo his sentiments. It's very clear, and just the tone that you used. You didn't really have to holler or anything. Basically, you kind of stood there, told the story, and just it helped to give the kind of background of just from looking at it from a sibling aspect, and then also just seeing how a person would feel if their sister, were a prostitute, or you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Raising those questions would definitely put something on someone's mind.
Yeah.
So that was great.
Huh?
Piggyback off of that, your tone and the way you spoke, I had to keep reminding myself you were playing a character.
Mhm.
And he's not talking about his real sister,
Yeah.
but it seemed like it.
Yeah. And that's really good, right? That's the art, the beauty, of first person preaching, right?
Yeah.
When you can, when your listeners are thinking so much like, were they believing that you are, real? Like that's your story as well as the character in the Bible story. So good. I thought the introduction was very solid. Good opening line. I'm actually glad you didn't tell us your name, right? Like the text doesn't say the name.
No.
So I don't think you could make one up if you wanted to, but I don't think it's necessary. What's necessary is that you told us whose brother you are and you hammered that home. So I thought that was really good. To echo First Mark's comment, it was very clear, so I thought that was good, even though you covered a lot of ground, right? And I actually like how you did that because you started the end of the story and then flashed back to when we went to when you went to Rahab's home, but then you flash back to Rahab's encounter in chapter 2,
Yeah.
and then fast forwarded up to 6, and then so forth. And I actually really like that. Now that I'm surprised that it was that clear,
Okay.
because I think that could be very confusing. But the way that you said it, when you told us about how Rahab told you what she had experienced, I thought that was very, very clever, and I thought it was really, really strong. So I thought that was good. Yeah, good. What could he do differently? What would you like more of or less of, or any other aspects? Yeah, first Mark.
One thing I was thinking was, two things I was thinking. It seemed like the last time you preached, there was a lot of energy and there was a lot of almost like you were experiencing your emotions as you were saying,
Yeah.
And this one I felt like maybe just the difficulty in having to remember all of that stuff and keep it straight in your head. It just seemed like there wasn't that same kind of energy this time.
Yeah.
And just that it wasn't that I doubted your conviction or your sincerity.
Yeah.
It was just that it seemed like just holding it all up there was hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Because
felt.
it was such a huge amount that you covered.
Yeah.
I mean,
I felt the same way. Like I thought your use of language was fantastic, right? I mean, every word had a purpose. There's hardly any verbal clutter. I don't think there was any, but there might have been. But so I thought your language was great. But yeah, maybe like a little bit more like facial expression or variance in your rate or your volume. Maybe even some pauses, dramatic pauses to reflect back, think upon those types of things. But yeah, I echo that. Like, you were believable, and listening to you was fantastic. So what could help it go from a good message to a great message is just a little bit more of that facial expression and so forth. So yeah, good. What else? Yes.
Is it necessary to have like a clear application? Because I didn't like get a clear app, but like, I don't know if that's even necessary.
Yeah.
You know, I loved it, and I think it would
Yeah.
be a great sermon, but do you even need that?
Yeah, that's what I was
Or is it
thinking
just-
as well.
That was one thing that I think I tried to raise the need, but I think I could have hammered it home at the end again.
Okay.
Like, what would you have done if, like, the most wayward member of your family, the person you least expect, came to you with faith? What do you do
Yeah.
when the faithless discover God? Something like that. Like, do you believe them? Do you trust them? Because, like, that's kind of the tension of anybody, like, surface level reading the text. It's just like, well, Rahab, she's a prostitute, you know?
Yeah.
And kind of like hammering home, like, who are the prostitutes in our lives almost.
Yeah. I think what you could do,
Yeah.
thinking about your target audience and so forth, and then your message, is tackle the two different groups with this same passage, right? So, in the one sense, you can encourage those in the congregation who have a past like Rahab's, right? So, you could say something like, so here's my sister, this prostitute. But God looked past her scarlet letter of adultery and saw her scarlet robe of faith. And he can do that to you. He still does that today. Whatever is your scarlet letter, or whatever is your, failure or
Yeah.
part of or shame, God can look past that, and He can use your story, your faith, to change people.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at you, most of you in here, and I don't see many scarlet letters on you.
Yeah.
You might not have a background like Rahab, and praise God for that. But you need to know that God can use your story too. Your faith, even though you don't think it's significant, trust me. Faith in the one true God, or however she says it in chapter 2, the God of heaven above and on earth below, faith in that God has the power to change lives. So go share, or something like that, So you could tackle the unrepentant sinner
Yep.
in the room, but also the Christian who grew up in a household that that went to church and things like that. So you could tackle both of them. Yeah, that was one thing that I thought about, and then I also put in there any way you could point to Jesus. But I think by doing that, by even just saying the Lord, the God of heaven and earth.
Yeah.
Now, if you wanted to point to Jesus, you could either do it in the sermon or maybe after the song. You come up later and then talk about how you could then focus on the strictly Jesus' gospel message of death on the cross, and maybe then you could use the same the concept of scarlet or red cord, right?
Yeah.
And the red cord that we look to is the blood, from his body that was
Yeah.
shed for us, and his power over the grave. In fact, as we take communion this morning, we have juice, grape juice, but it's meant to represent the blood of Jesus. And so before you take it, just look at it, notice the color of it, and notice the color of, or you could
Yeah.
play off of
Yeah.
that thing.
Yeah.
I think those are cool, it's
Yeah.
significant. You don't want to be too,
Yeah.
too much of a, what's the word, allegorical. But, yeah,
Yeah.
you can think about it. Yes. Oh, and so, one last thing,
Yeah.
is I actually think that's pretty cool, is I would have it hanging the whole time.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could do it here, but if you do this
I was
again,
kinda thinking that, like. if
It'd
I,
be
like,
fun.
Could have just put it up on the chalkboard.
Yeah.
Like right there.
yeah, you can put it the whole time, and then we're always kind of looking at it because that's what would have happened,
Yeah.
I guess. And then and so I've kept it all this time, as a memorial because this saved my life. I hope something better saves your life,
Yeah.
or I hope something,
Yeah.
red hanging up saying, I don't know.
Yeah, but no, there's definitely, it's there for me.
Grace, yeah, you play with it. Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
I thought you did a lot of things really well. You just described the scene, you painted the scene really well.
Mhm.
You just had a lot of great details. They said, you used language well. She moved to a hole in the wall, a literal hole in the wall of
Yeah.
Jericho.
I liked on that language. I don't mean to cut you off, but and the walls became our bridge. Just things like that.
Yeah.
It's great. Okay, go ahead, Grace.
You had built it up so much, and then you got to the conclusion and just sort of shot off.
Yeah.
So I think maybe taking some time to what we talked about, just
Climb down the ladder of sure.
yeah, and just I wrote, I'm sitting in the pew. You told a great story, but what do I do now?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think that, and that's the hard part with the first person is how can you continually bring it back to the 21st century?
Yeah.
I think you did it in the introduction. You could have maybe even done it again in the twice in the introduction because we're still getting used to who you are.
Yeah.
I think again when you talked about your character somewhere in the middle, you talked about I trusted in the walls. I trusted in such and such. I trusted in such and such. You could then step aside and say, what are you trusting in today?
Yeah.
What walls are you trusting
Yeah.
in? Maybe it's the walls of your place of employment. Maybe it's the walls of your security at home. Maybe it's the walls of your spouse. Well, I need to tell you, I learned a valuable lesson that day that there aren't any walls that can be trusted other than those of the Lord Jesus, or the Lord of the God of heaven above. Yeah. So, and then again in the conclusion to Grayson's point.
Yeah.
Go ahead, buddy.
Also, you brought up the faith of the Israelites,
Mhm.
which I thought was really needed.
Yeah.
But you did harp on it too much. But it's Rahab's faith and the faith of the Israelites. It's the point of the text.
Yeah.
So I think it's good that it was needed that you brought that in.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good.
Anybody commented on the Aiken part yet?
Yeah.
That was just odd. I didn't like it because it just juxtaposes it to the very next story.
Yeah.
He's not a good man, he's a selfish man.
Yeah.
So
Well-
that's just, I thought weird,
Yeah.
Do you wanna
we
respond?
talked about that, and I went for it. I mean, if that is a contrast that's drawn out in the text. Rahab is a prostitute, a woman, and a Canaanite. Achan is a man, an Israelite, and a patriarch in this house. And so, I wanted to hint there so badly in some way, just because they're mirror texts or foils to each other. But you're right, if I could rehearse it again and go over it and polish that ending and just have it as a one-off, I'd probably still kind of insist on it because it's goofy, but it
I just
It-
find another way. Just, my neighbor Aiken, I'm going to,
Yeah.
he's teaching you the law. Wrong guy to be teaching you the law.
yeah, and that's
Well,
and that's
he
part
doesn't.
of
But he doesn't know that, right?
Yeah.
That's the humor
Yeah.
of it. Is if you know the story.
On surface level, Rahab's the bad one. On surface level,
Yeah.
Achan's
Right.
the good one.
He look. Yeah.
And
Appears.
then,
Yeah.
So I wanted to hint at that for people who might get it, and
Yeah.
but not just jump into the next chapter. So yeah, it was. This was an
What,
experimental.
Caleb, you liked it?
Oh, I loved it, yeah. Especially because then I'm my mom's going into the rest of the story and what happens afterwards, and I can imagine you're learning the law from Achan, and then he gets discovered, and you're just God.
Yeah.
And then that leads you even up for the next sermon, right?
Yeah.
That, and
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, it was a gamble, but I thought this is a class, so why not?
Yeah.
Maybe-
Well, and that's
maybe I
what
wouldn't have
exactly.
gone off in,
And that's what you need to do. Get our opinions,
Yeah.
about that. So yeah.
He also didn't have a wife in the
Yeah. Wait, Achan didn't have a? I thought he had.
Yeah, Achan had a wife.
Yeah.
Look at the text, it
He got
says,
stoned.
he,
Or a woman. What is
his
it?
sons, his daughters, his camels,
It doesn't
I'm
talk
sorry, his
about
donkeys, it describes his household and it excludes wife.
Hmm?
It jumps
Well-
straight from him to his kids. It's an interesting contrast.
Yeah.
Go back to reeling in your.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Thanks for bringing up a point that wasn't even in the sermon, Ben.
You didn't cover that. Come on.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
About the big idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since I looked at that text. Where did you, like, what was the exegetical?
Like your subject complement, if you could, I mean, you might not be able to remember that, but your subject
Yeah,
complement,
I know
like,
it's
where's
kinda
it
like
coming
probably
from?
looked on that a while ago.
The subject complement, the one for,
Yeah. So for your homily, so yeah, your subject complement. So, what's the author talking about?
yeah.
God, why does God preserve Rahab's Rahab and her family? Complement answer is probably something along the lines of because she believed in God even though she was the most unlikely people
Yeah.
of the most unlikely people. So big idea, exegetical idea would be God saves people who believe in Him, even the most unlikely of people.
Yeah.
So then your homiletical idea is something smoother, which is God can use anyone's faith,
Yeah.
or God saves anyone's faith, no matter what their story, or no matter what their
And I
background.
think for just to that point, to kind of things to improve, I think for the one for us was as God can use anyone's faith as exemplified by Rahab's testimony and our own. And so I think like in the end going to more like, and we have testimonies too.
Yeah, yeah.
That aren't any better.
That's right.
You know, metric of sin than
Yeah.
Rahab's.
Yeah.
Can I ask why you went with a character that's not explicitly mentioned in the text?
He is mentioned, yeah, her brothers and siblings are all saved. Yeah. And it's just like a one verse where it's like all of them are saved. And that's because this is a text that has a lot of gaps to fill in.
Mm-hmm.
And actually after I wrote it, I watched a sermon by Matt Chandler, and he just mentions Rahab in a Hebrews text.
Okay.
And in a similar way, kind of like says like you infer a lot of like her story,
Yeah.
her culture and stuff. And so I just try to use as much imagination as possible.
Mhm.
So like it doesn't say like she hit rock bottom or like, but like you know that the Canaanite gods were like sexually charged and all of their worship was sexually charged. Like, you go
Right.
back to Numbers, the
Yeah.
Moabites seduce, so there's all that stuff that like you can kind of infer and gather together in the text. And so I thought it was a pretty imaginative, but it was enough that I thought I could go on and build a likely story.
Good. Great. Anything else? Anything else you want to add? Great job. Johnny, I think 2 times in a row, man, you can preach. So good job. Keep up the good work. All right. I look forward to hearing your third one. Okay. 10 minutes, but I don't know how to fill it. Okay, so Mark's going Wednesday. Okay, Mark's going Wednesday. All right. God, this is killing me. But you're dismissed, all right? So, unless
The sermon evals are
the sermon evaluation.
No, the evals, we're supposed to watch them.
Yeah. So,
How you want us to do that, or?
in the syllabus, there's is that what you're when you watch?
You want something to talk about?
Oh,
Okay, this is
no,
like,
just
come down
turn
the
it
line.
in. Turn it in 1 week after
Yeah.
you preach. Unturn it in, or I'm sorry, I'll save you some.
We're supposed to like watch.
Remember how he was saying?
We're supposed to critique. Why is it on YouTube?
Oh, we haven't got to that yet.
That's what I was
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Yeah.
Johnny turned in his practice things.
Yeah.
Are you supposed to turn those in the daydream?
Yeah, I oftentimes forget to collect them.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
You need 2 of mine.
just give. I trust you. I've already graded your sermons, so turn it in next time.
Gotcha.
Johnny, let me go get your thunder.
Oh, sweet.
When you were explaining from like an Amrite perspective, like the mythical character view.
Scary.
It sounds like those like crazy like Persian movies or
So this is
whatever,
actually
like all that cultic stuff. Like